My name is Susan Fernbach, and welcome everyone to this webinar today on genetic and support resources for families. This is really brought to you all by the Department of Molecular and Human Genetics at Baylor College of Medicine and Texas Children's Hospital in collaboration with our partners at the UT Texas Center for Disability Studies, along with support by the Texas Department of State Health Services. So we have been offering webinars for families across the state, and we welcome all of you this Saturday morning. So we have three speakers today: Amanda Gerard, Laura Buckner, and myself. We are going to try and give you as many resources that we hope are useful to you all with yourselves, your families, any colleagues. And really, we're just trying to share our knowledge. You all may know of other resources too, and you're welcome to put those and any of your questions in the chat. And we welcome questions in English and Spanish. So let me introduce our first speaker today, Amanda Gerard, and we'll get started. Amanda is a certified genetic counselor at Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor College of Medicine. She received her master's degree in genetic counseling from the UT Health Science Center at Houston. She works as a genetic counselor in the General Genetics Clinic and the Skeletal Dysplasia Clinic at Texas Children's Hospital. Amanda worked with research to identify and describe new rare genetic conditions. She participates in education and supervision of the genetic counseling students at the Baylor College of Medicine Genetic Counseling Program and is the chair of the Texas Children's Genetic Families Advisory Committee. So please give a warm welcome to Amanda, and Amanda, will let you take it away.
Hi. Okay. Thank you for having me. So I am going to talk through some different resources that we use within the genetics clinic at Texas Children's Hospital to help us educate families and other healthcare professionals. I know that genetics can be a little bit of a difficult area to navigate sometimes. We're a new specialty to a lot of people when they come to see us, and we sometimes use a lot of terms and concepts that can be not something you come across in your everyday life. And so I'm just going to share some of the resources that we use to try to help educate families about different concepts or topics that we may talk about within our clinic. So let me see. Okay, so the first area I'm going to touch on briefly is just how to find a genetics clinic or a genetics provider. If you're not already plugged in with a genetics clinic or as some sort of genetics provider, that certainly is a great resource to kind of help centralize things and answer some of these questions, and of course help with managing care as well. And so the Department of State Health Services does have a list on their website of genetics providers, and it's broken down by region of providers within Texas. And I'll mention briefly, I have these little links down at the bottom. The webinar attendees, you guys will have access to all of these at the end, so you don't need to worry about writing these down or anything. They're more just there for reference. But this is the DSHS website. This is where you can find resources about genetics providers who are practicing within Texas. And then another great resource both for Texas and for finding providers nationally is the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics. They have a Find a Genetic Clinic link on their website, and you can just go in and type where you live. They'll show you genetics clinics that are available near you. Find a Genetic Counselor is also a resource that's available through the National Society of Genetic Counselors website. So sometimes even if you don't see a genetics clinic that's listed on those first two resources, there might be genetic counselors that practice within other clinics that are not necessarily listed as genetics clinics, but do have genetic services available because there's a genetic counselor or somebody similar who's providing services through that clinic. So some common examples of this might be a prenatal clinic where genetic counselors are helping OBs with ordering genetic tests during pregnancy. Some cancer clinics have genetic counseling and services available for questions about hereditary cancers. And then there are many other specialties or areas where genetic counselors might practice as well. And so even if you don't see necessarily a genetics clinic listed, see if there's a genetic counselor who's available near you as well. And you can always reach out to different clinics or different genetic counselors or geneticists and ask, this is what I'm looking for. Is this a service that you would provide? And they can advise you about whether that would be an appropriate place or maybe have ideas of other resources for you as well. Another area that can be helpful, especially in the past couple of years since the pandemic, is that telehealth services have become much more widely available. And so on the NSGC website, and I think on the ACMG website as well, they let you search for telehealth options. So that can be something to consider even if there's not a genetics provider who's available locally to you. There are more genetics providers now who are able to provide telehealth services, usually within the states that they practice in, but some of them are licensed to provide those services within other states as well. So that would be something that they could advise you about also. Okay, so that's briefly how to find a genetics clinic, which of course is a great first step if you have questions related to genetics. But you will probably want to educate yourself about different genetic conditions or different genetics topics kind of on your own too, and do a little bit of research. So what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my slides are some of the resources that we use to educate ourselves and other healthcare providers and families about different genetics conditions and genetics topics. The first resource that I'll mention is called Gene Reviews. So it's an online database that has hundreds of articles about different genetic conditions. It's quite detailed usually, and it's usually written by a geneticist or somebody who's an expert on that specific condition. And it is, like I said, quite detailed, so it can be very helpful, but it's a little bit heavy in some of the medical terminology that it uses sometimes. And so I just have an example of one of the common resources we use for a condition called neurofibromatosis on the next page. You can see, just looking through it a little bit, that it does use a lot of medical language. And so if that's not something that you have too much of a background in, this might not be the best resource, just because it can get a little bit difficult to navigate if you're not familiar with some of the terms that are used. But if you are, or if you're wanting to provide some resources to a healthcare provider who might be more familiar with some of these terms, this can definitely be a very helpful resource to look into. Another similar resource that I would say is a little bit more layperson or family patient friendly is called Genetics Home Reference. And if you happen to have ever used this website before, it might look a little bit different now because it's merged with another resource called Medline Plus. But it still has all of the same resources, and it has a lot of guides about specific genetic conditions that I would say have a little bit more friendly language that's easy to understand. They also have some resources about some general genetics concepts. So they have some guides about genes, chromosomes, that sort of information to help understand just some general genetics topics a little bit better as well. Another resource that can be helpful where it's available is the American Academy of Pediatrics. So they have guidelines that they've published for several common genetic conditions. It's certainly not available for every condition that's out there, but some of the most common syndromes that we see in our clinic do have these AAP guidelines for them. They're very helpful, and when they're available, we usually provide them to patients, both for themselves and for them to provide to their other healthcare providers, just to educate themselves a little bit more about the condition. They usually have almost kind of like cheat sheets where they go through by age, and they break down at this age, what are the things that we need to be thinking about? Are there imaging studies, labs, other things that we need to be monitoring for? And what are some of kind of the considerations or things that we need to be talking about at this age? So it's quite helpful. Like I said, it's not available for every condition, unfortunately. So you can just Google the syndrome name and then AAP guidelines. And if there is a guideline available for that condition, it should pop up and be available for you to download. So for the next several slides, I'm going to talk more so about patient advocacy organizations. So these are groups that have are more kind of support resources. So a lot of them have information about specific syndromes or conditions, and also have ways to connect with other families who are part of the rare disease community. So these are really great resources, both if you're looking for more knowledge and if you're looking to connect with other families or something like that. The first one that I'll touch on is called the National Organization for Rare Disorders, or NORD. They're a patient advocacy organization that's dedicated to people who have rare diseases. They have a rare disease database that has a lot of guides about specific genetic conditions. And so these are a little bit similar to Gene Reviews and Genetics Home Reference. They're very helpful for learning about specific conditions and are usually pretty easy to understand. They have a rare disease video library where they have educational videos on some conditions. And then they also have a patient financial assistance program that I know a couple of our patients in our clinic have mentioned to me before. It's an application process, but they can sometimes help with funding different medical treatments or that sort of thing if that's something that's needed. They also have an annual family forum, which was in Houston a couple of years ago. And I know I attended and a lot of our providers and families attended. It was quite helpful. They have a lot of information about connecting with other families, with other healthcare providers, and resources that can be helpful to individuals who are impacted by a rare condition. So this is certainly a resource and a website that I would recommend if you're not familiar with that already. And another similar one is called the Genetic and Rare Diseases Information Center, or GARD. So they also have rare condition guidelines and about lots of different rare genetic diagnoses. One thing that's very helpful about their website is that it's all translated into Spanish as well. And so this is a great resource for Spanish-speaking patients. They do have all of their rare disorder guides that are accessible both in English and in Spanish. And they have some general guides as well about genetics-related topics for patients and for healthcare providers too. Another helpful resource is Global Genes. They're another similar patient advocacy organization. They have information and resources for communities that are affected by rare diseases. And they also have a rare disease list that has guides about different genetic diagnoses. A couple of kind of unique offerings they have. One is called the Rare University. So they have courses that are relevant to different rare diagnoses or different rare disease topics that are available for families to take kind of at their own pace. They have a service called the Rare Concierge Service, which is essentially where you can send in information that you're looking for about a specific diagnosis or questions that you have. And they have providers who are able to help kind of guide you to different resources or that sort of thing. They have a rare patient advocacy summit as well, where families are able to connect. Another couple of resources for this part. So unique or understanding rare chromosome and gene disorders, I would say is probably one of the resources that I really find most helpful and tend to use frequently. It has information about rare chromosome conditions. And so these mostly are conditions that affect the way that a chromosome is structured. So you might, for example, if you have a family member who has been told that they have a microdeletion syndrome or a microduplication syndrome or some sort of condition that affects the chromosome in some way, unique is probably where I would point you to start out. They have a lot of information about those types of conditions that you might often see referred to as a deletion or a duplication syndrome. And they have guides about many of these diagnoses that are quite helpful. They're very detailed, but the way that they're written is also very easy to understand. And so I tend to use them both for myself to educate myself about diagnoses and also to send to families to help them learn more about a new diagnosis. They have something called the Little Yellow Book that they send out to all families who are a member of their organization. And it just talks about chromosomes and different concepts that are helpful to provide a little bit of background. And then many of their guides are translated into several languages, so that's quite helpful as well. A lot of their guides are translated into Spanish. They also have some that are translated into other languages, not all of them, but it depends a little bit. So it can be a helpful resource if you're looking for something in a different language. And then the Chromosome Disorder Outreach is a very similar group that also focuses on rare chromosome-related conditions. They're based within the U.S. The unique one that I mentioned on the previous slide is based within the UK, but both groups do have individuals from all over the world who are members of them. So they're both great resources to use. The Chromosome Disorder Outreach has many similar resources. They're also able to make personalized information packets for members if they have questions about something that's not listed on their website. And then the last one that I will mention here is called the Genetic Support Foundation. So this is a resource that does not have as many syndrome-specific resources, but they have a lot of patient-friendly informational pages about kind of general topics related to genetics. So they have little articles explaining different types of inheritance patterns that we might talk about in the genetics clinic. They have little pages that explain different genetic tests that we commonly order within genetics clinic. And they also have a little page about family history that just talks about questions that we might ask about someone's family, what kind of happens when we take a family history within the genetics clinic, just so that patients who are coming in can read about that and think about what sorts of information they might want to gather about their family or what's going to happen at the appointment. So this is a very helpful resource for kind of just general information about genetics clinics and some general options that we might talk about at the clinic. And so I have just a few more slides related to syndrome-specific support. So all of the resources that I talked about previously are great kind of general resources to learn about different genetic diagnoses and connect with other families. A lot of conditions also have more syndrome-specific information that's available or support resources that are available. And those can be, of course, quite helpful as well. And I'm going to talk about a few of the more common syndromes that we see in our clinic and some of the resources that are available for those. I'll talk a little bit about this at the end, but I would definitely encourage you to look for syndrome-specific support resources, and I'll talk a little bit about how to do that in a few slides. So Down syndrome is a very common genetic diagnosis. We see many patients in our family, in our clinic who have Down syndrome. And there, because it's so common, are many great resources related to Down syndrome that are out there. So here in the US, we have the National Down Syndrome Society. They have general information about Down syndrome, information for families who have just recently been diagnosed, and information that's available across the lifespan as well. They have information about local support organizations, and here in Houston, that would be the Down Syndrome Association of Houston, which I listed as well. And they also have information about specialty clinics. Specialty clinics can be quite a good resource if they're available for the condition that you're wondering about. So typically specialty clinics are a clinic that's specifically dedicated to seeing patients with that specific diagnosis. And they usually bring in specialists who practice in whatever areas of medicine are relevant for the healthcare issues or concerns that can be seen in that patient population. And so it's a really good resource to just have to kind of come in once and be able to see multiple providers that you need to see, instead of having to schedule a bunch of different appointments with different doctors and come in on different days. And so because Down syndrome is so common, there are many specialty clinics that are available for Down syndrome throughout the US. We have a Down syndrome clinic here at Texas Children's, and then many websites will have these little databases where you can go in and search to see if there's a specialty clinic that's available near you. And then I already mentioned, but the Down Syndrome Association of Houston is a great resource. They have information for local families about support groups and educational programs that are available. And their website is also all available in Spanish, which is very helpful. And I would encourage you to go look and see. If you don't live in Houston, just look for resources near you, and there are many other Down Syndrome associations throughout the US. Another condition that we see commonly in our clinic is called neurofibromatosis. So this is a condition that can have some different features, but most commonly we can see different findings on the skin, mainly called neurofibromas, which are just little growths that can happen on the skin. A great resource for this condition is the Children's Tumor Foundation, and we typically provide families with their information when we're first talking about a diagnosis of neurofibromatosis. They have information, again, for newly diagnosed patients and throughout the lifespan. They also have a resource for specialty clinics, and we do have a specialty clinic for neurofibromatosis here at TCH as well. They also have an NS registry, which is a resource that patients can enroll in if they would like to, just to better help us understand different features that can be seen in NS. And then they also have an annual conference, which many of these organizations do. There's a local version of this organization, the Texas Neurofibromatosis Foundation as well. And so there are a lot of good resources to connect with other families that are available through these websites. And then finally, the last specific condition I'll talk about is called 22q deletion syndrome. You might also hear of it referred to as DeGeorge syndrome, sometimes velocardiofacial syndrome. But there are great resources related to this diagnosis as well. So there's the 22q Family Foundation available nationally. They have a clinic locator. They also have a family map where families can go in and, if they're interested, put their location to connect with other families. And there's also a Texas version of this group available on Facebook as well. And so those are a few of the more common genetic conditions that we see in our clinic, which is why I included those. But there are tons and tons of conditions that we see in our clinic, and they can vary in frequency from some of these more common conditions that I talked about to conditions where there have maybe only been a few other patients in the world who are known of right now. And so when you go and search for a specific condition, the resources that you find can vary a good bit. Sometimes you'll find a lot of resources. Sometimes there might not really be anything that comes up when you look on Google, unfortunately. I would encourage you to try to connect with some of those more general resources that I talked about in my previous slides. But something else that can be helpful as well is to search on social media, which has been a great resource for rare disease families to connect. So you can search on Facebook for the specific gene name, the syndrome name that you're wondering about. You can look on Twitter or Instagram. And there are many families who are connecting this way, even if there are just a few families in the world right now who have a specific diagnosis. We have several families in our clinic who have been able to connect with other families through social media, which of course is great. And as more genetic testing is becoming more accessible and more people are being diagnosed, our hope is that maybe more families will be able to come together and connect through these resources. And even if you look and you don't find anything, if that's something that you're interested in, I would always encourage you to think about being the person who maybe starts a Facebook group for a specific diagnosis. There might be other people out there who are interested in connecting with somebody as well. So certainly consider that if that's something that you would be interested in. And so those are all of my slides. I know I talked a lot and I listed a lot of different resources. And like I said, you guys will have access to all of those, but this is my contact information here. I think we're saving questions till the end, but I'm happy to take questions in a little bit as well if there are any that have come up.
So much, Amanda. Those were fantastic. And yes, we will take questions at the end. You're welcome to put them into the chat now or save them until the end. And we also are going to be sending you all handouts and links to the various resources. So we are super excited about that. And I wanted to mention to Margarita that I think that perhaps the interpretation now is working. If you wanted to try that. No. Okay. All right. Never mind, everyone. Sorry. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, who is Laura Buckner. And Laura is a licensed professional counselor and former special educator with a master's in education. Laura's areas of expertise include person-centered practices, leadership and advocacy, trauma-informed care, and supporting families and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities so that they can live lives that they find meaningful with access to necessary supports and services. Laura is the founding partner of the Institute for Person-Centered Practices and a mentor trainer with the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices, where she also serves on the board of directors. Laura is the devoted wife to Ron and mom to sons Michael and David. And Laura, I will turn it over to you if this is a good time.
This is good. I've got allergies. My eyes are just watering like I'm crying, but I'm not crying. And let me share my screen. Well, let's see here. It's not letting me share my PowerPoint. Hold on a minute. Let me get that up.
We can see that it's sharing now. And
oh, it is? Okay, good. So you can see my PowerPoint? Oh, good. Okay.
Yes. Just need to start it in the slideshow.
I thought the pandemic was, okay, fabulous. Well, and what else? All that stuff that Susan just read just means I've been at this a long time and I'm getting old. I worked for the University of Texas at Austin at what we call a UCED, University Center of Excellence in Developmental Disability. It's a mouthful, but those UCEDs are federally funded. And so every state has a UCED. We're a big state, so we get two. We also have a UCED at Texas A&M. And we've been really pleased to be a part of this project with the Baylor College of Medicine and the Texas Department of Health Services for a number of years now. I am a former educator and a licensed professional counselor, but my most important letters are those last three. My mom degree, I am the parent of David, who is 32 and a half, will be 33 on the 4th of July, and diagnosed with a rare genetic condition when he was 3 months old. And so I found myself diving into this genetic world totally out of the blue, totally unexpected. I saw his first seizure when he was 3 months old on the living room couch. And 3 days later, an MRI and numerous doctor visits later, we had a scary disease diagnosis without a lot of information. 32 years ago, the study of human genome has come light years in just my 32 years in this world, because 32 years ago, they could tell us it was a genetic disease, but they couldn't tell us if we carried the gene or if we didn't, or, if we had it in the family. And I mean, I was, one of 4 kids of all childbearing age. It was a frightening time, obviously. About probably 12 to 15 years later, they discovered not only 1 gene, but 2 genes that can cause the disease. And they were able to tell us we don't carry the gene. So we had what they call, this is science language, sporadic mutation. And I call it a fluke. It just happened. But I want to share with you some resources that I know are really valuable resources to parents who find themselves, just like I did, all of a sudden in a world you didn't expect to be in, with information you don't have a clue how to manage. I want to show you some resources that either you as a new parent in this world or a professional working with parents in this world can use as really valuable resources for the next steps. Not only just for Amanda did a great job of telling you the genetic and the medical resources that are available, but the reality is after you leave that medical appointment or that geneticist's office, you got to go home and live a life. And the resources I want to show you are how to live a life with that diagnosis. And I will tell you, first of all, a lot of it depends on the parent's attitude, the family's attitude, even the medical professional's attitude toward that diagnosis. We were so fortunate that the pediatric neurologist who diagnosed my son also was a licensed psychologist. He met us in the hospital that night after diagnosing him. We were put in the hospital right away and had to begin in steroid injections the very next morning. But he met us in the hospital that night, visited with us about this diagnosis we never saw coming. And he said, this child will be as disabled as you choose to see him. And that's just such a valuable, in my 32 years, I still look back and I thank God that he was the man that met us and started us on this journey, because he was so right. If we had chosen to see David as totally disabled for life, no matter what we did or couldn't do, that he would be living a very different life today. And so we chose to see David for who he is and what he can do, rather than who he's not and what he can't do. It's all about changing your attitude and your mindset toward that diagnosis. That's a big part of our work with families. Those of you who are on the call who work with families, you'd be surprised how those little nuggets of wisdom, like our neurologist nugget a minute ago, change people's lives by helping them alter their own attitudes about the diagnosis and the potentially co-occurring disabilities. So I encourage you to look at disability as just a medical diagnosis. It's just one piece of the puzzle. And think of it as a passport to services. So I meet a lot of parents, and I know they're well-meaning, well-intended, but I meet a lot of parents who want to hand out cards at the grocery store saying, my child has autism, read more about it here. My child has neurofibromatosis, read more about it here. And I know they think they're educating the public, but, in the real world, the rest of us don't go around saying, I have breast cancer, read more about it here. Or I have whatever. Read more about it here. Our child's diagnosis is only needed when you're trying to open a door for services. And I want you to educate parents. If you're a family member, educate yourself that you only need that passport, that child's label or diagnosis, when you're trying to open a door to services. For example, you're trying to open the door to special ed services. So at this public school, you'll need a passport, you'll need a diagnosis that qualifies them for those services. You're trying to qualify for SSI, Social Security, or some medical service that you need to have your son or daughter receive. You'll need to pull out that diagnosis, your passport. But you don't need the passport for a lot of things in daily life, like going to the grocery store. So put the passport away until you need it. And the thing I can best advise professionals as well as family members is to find and or provide resources that are knowledgeable, up to date, critical, reliable, and accessible. You know, when my son was diagnosed 32 years ago by the pediatric neurologist, he had a pediatrician who I know meant well, was trying to help. But when he learned of my son's new diagnosis, he sent me some information in the mail that he had gotten out of a March of Dimes book that unfortunately was pretty outdated, I think. And that same neurologist that diagnosed my son and said he'll be as disabled as you choose to see him had also told us, I don't want you reading anything about this diagnosis unless it's written by Dr. Manuel Gomez, who was at the time the national expert, if not international expert, in my son's diagnosis. And thankfully, because he had told me that, don't read anything unless it's by Dr. Manuel Gomez. If he hadn't told me that, and I had read that March of Dimes stuff that the pediatrician sent me, I don't know if I could have gotten out of bed the next day, because it was a lot of gloom and doom and not current best information. So be really careful about where you point people to make sure, and the internet has been a real blessing in some respects, because you can find really good, reliable, up-to-date information. But by that same token, the internet can also be a dangerous place that's not always as knowledgeable or as up-to-date as we'd like it to be. So make sure when you're giving families resources, or you're looking for resources for your own family, that you look for resources that are truly knowledgeable, up-to-date, reliable, easily accessible. If you can't recommend those for a family, don't recommend any. So here's some reliable, accessible, up-to-date resources you can give families. The first one, and this is just for families in Texas, the first one has a time limit, so move fast if you have family in mind or somebody you think you might be interested in yourself. This is a program that's run by the Texas Developmental Disabilities Council. Just like the USAD I mentioned that I work for at UT, every state also has a Developmental Disabilities Council. We call it the DD Council. Every state has one, again, federally funded. Ours is the Texas Council on Developmental Disabilities. And they fund a lot of programs. They get a lot of national federal funding that they use to fund programs specifically for the state of Texas and people with developmental disabilities. One of those programs they run themselves is called Texas Partners in Policymaking. I'm proud to say that I am a Texas and Partners in Policymaking graduate from 1996. Texas DD Council was one of the first. The program was created in Minnesota by the DD Council there. And Texas was one of the first states to say, we like what you're doing, we want to do it too. And they began replicating it in Texas. And I am a graduate of the 1996 class. I became the program coordinator of this program in 1998, and I ran it until 2006. when the DD Council shut it down for about 10 years, they thought, oh, we can do some other stuff better. You know what? They found out, no, we need it back. So they restarted it in 2016. If you know, it's open to family members of younger children with developmental disabilities. It's also open to adults with developmental disabilities. So if you have a disability that is acquired later after the age of 22, you wouldn't be eligible for this. But if you have a developmental, that means diagnosed before the age of 22, developmental diagnosis, developmental disabilities diagnosis, or a family member who has one, you could apply for this program. It is an application-only program. You apply. If you're selected, and the applications close on March 25th. If you're selected, it consists of 6 two-day training sessions that are held monthly from September to April. And, you know, prior to I call it the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, those sessions were held in person in Austin, I believe. Since the pandemic, it's been held virtually. Who knows what the future will hold? But if you're selected to participate, all of the classes and even your costs like transportation, hotel, if you go in person, are free. So that's something to think about, especially if you're a family member or self-advocate. Here's another really valuable resource. It's available to Texans all over the state. A lot of states have a parent-to-parent organization, and Texas is one of those. We have one of the better ones in the country, if you ask me. It's a local advocacy and support organization that serves parents and families all over the state. They often will have family members involved who share a similar diagnosis as your child or the child you're serving. And it certainly can refer you to local ECI, Early Childhood Intervention Services. The website is right here at the top, and I believe it's in the handouts as well, or just Google Texas Parent to Parent. They're really good at connecting parents to other parents who have similar journeys, similar diagnoses, similar concerns. They have typically held an annual conference, as well as some regional conferences that are just beyond amazing. If you get on their website, you can get on their newsletter list, and they may even have, if it's an in-person conference, they sometimes have stipends that will cover a family's costs, maybe for the hotel or maybe for the travel. They usually will have sessions specific to kids with disabilities and their siblings, so that your kids can go down the hall to that room and you go down the other hall to a class. Here's another really valuable website and resource specific to families whose kids are receiving special education services. It's called Project Texas First. I was a part of starting this website, I'm proud to say. It's run by an organization in Houston called Family to Family Network. And it really happened because some of us as parents were sitting on stakeholder committees at the Texas Education Agency decades ago. And we would say, you know, your parent information is lousy. You know, usually all parents got was on the back of their IEP notice, their ARD notice, and it would be in really fine print legalese, very hard to understand. And parents didn't know how the IEP meeting was supposed to work. They don't even know what an ARD meeting is or that they've been to one. And so the Project First website is specifically it's written by parents whose kids have received special ed services, and it's written for those parents. It is funded by the Texas Education Agency, and it's validated by the Texas Education Agency. So I tell parents, if you find something on this website that really resonates and you want to take it to your school, you can know that it is validated by the Texas Education Agency. You know, sometimes you might go on the internet and find some school information that you say, this would be great. And you go to your school and you find out that's actually only legal in the state of Indiana, for example, or some other place. So you want to find Texas-friendly, Texas-specific special education. It goes into education and information about the special ed law, the processes, how to navigate the forms that happen in an IEP ARD meeting. And they cover birth to adulthood. You'll see on the page there in the picture, they have little buttons right in the middle that are age ranges. So if you have a child 0 to 3, you click that 0 to 3 button. It's going to go into all kinds of resources specific to that age range, all the way up through adulthood. It's also translated into Spanish. If you see up in the right-hand corner, there's a little green box that you click, and it will translate the entire website into Spanish. Family to Family Network is the organization I mentioned that runs the Project First website, but they also have funding from the Texas DD Council, the Developmental Disabilities Council, to run other projects. And they run some really great annual conferences in person or virtually, depending on the pandemic. Again, those conferences are run by families for families. Doesn't mean they don't bring in experts from other organizations, but they're designed by families. The organization Family to Family Network was founded in 1986. It's been around a good while, and they are doing right now a lot of virtual training, which is available to people all over the state or even outside of the state. You know, that is a blessing of the pandemic, is that we can reach more people via Zoom than we can reach when we have to show up in person. Family to Family is located in Houston, but they're reaching people all over the state or outside of the state as well. And their purpose is to help individuals with disabilities and their family members define and achieve success for themselves and their loved ones. Here's another resource in Texas specific, called Navigate Life Texas. It is funded by the Texas Health and Human Services organization, the state organization. And I just can't tell you what a wealth of information is available here. Again, it's developed by parents, for parents, and a lot of the content is written by parents of children and adults with disabilities or special health care needs. So, you know, I have said plenty of times in professional settings where I'm speaking to professionals in the field and said, I am so grateful for the work that you do and the help that you guys have given us in our 32 years on this journey. But the true experts, the ones I've gotten the really hardcore, reliable information from, are the people on the same journey I'm on, families, other families. You know, like the Social Security expert can talk all day long about Social Security and how your child can benefit. But the ones who know how to navigate that system, who know how to fill out the application, who know how to appeal the decision and manage their child's income when they get it, are the ones who've had to figure that out, because they're the ones that stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning figuring it out. And so Navigate Life Texas talks about, you'll see on those green buttons in the middle of the page, there's a link for healthcare and diagnosis. There's a link for specific to school and education. Insurance and financial help will go into to Social Security and other Medicaid waiver information. Family support, transition to adulthood. Again, age ranges or stages of life resources that are really well organized and really family friendly. While you're at that website, I ask you to go specifically to the link on Texas waivers. This is on the Navigate Life Texas website. Every state has Medicaid waiver programs. They're programs that you might qualify for that provides Medicaid services as well as other services like respite care or attendant care or home modifications or job coaching support, a variety of services. The hard part about Medicaid waivers, at least in Texas, is that we have a very long waiting list. Over 100,000 people are on the list. For example, I put my son on a Medicaid waiver wait list when he was 16 years old, 16 years ago, and his name came off the list and and services were available to him last month. So we waited 16 years. The typical wait for Medicaid waiver services is anywhere from 6 to 18 years. So you want to talk with families very early on about getting their names on a wait list. They don't have to even understand exactly what the wait list is or does, because they're going to be on it a while, but you want to get them on it. The sooner the better, because it's a long wait. And while you get them on that list, here are some clear, really critical information you need to let them know. Let them know that to get on the list, you don't have to qualify for services. For example, my son's name came off the list last month, and we had to go to a psychologist and have an IQ test and for him to qualify for services, which he did. But we didn't have to qualify for 16 years. We just sat on the list and waited. You don't have to know what services the child will or will not need or qualify for in order to get on the list. That all comes up when your name comes off the list. And here's what I recommend to professionals who are giving this information to families. Give it to them in writing. Suggest that a loved one help make the call so it doesn't get lost in the midst of everything else. I meet too many families who say, no, I never made that call. It just fell off my radar. Get somebody else to make the call. It's a 5-minute call. Or make the call with them. Do it with them. And remind them if they move to another part of the state, they need to update that information annually. People have fallen off the list because they moved and nobody could find them when their child's name came off the list. And another clear conversation you want to have with families is the fact that to qualify, they can never have more than $2,000 in their name. So if they have a savings account that they've saved for that child, they need to get it out of that child's name. You can't qualify for a Medicaid waiver or Social Security benefits. If they have more than $2,000 and 1 penny, you won't qualify. But remember, nobody has a crystal ball. The expert's job is to paint the picture that's possible, and that might be grim. But the family's job is to become the expert on who their child is. Their job is to believe in what is possible, to have hope for this child and their future, because you don't have a crystal ball either. We don't know. Technology has changed dramatically in my son's 32 years. He doesn't need to know how to spell or write because he can say it to his phone and it types it out. We didn't know that would be available 10 years ago. And here are my contact information. If you need more information, feel free to email me, because I blew through that fast. And I believe all those resources are in your handout. I'm going to turn it back to Susan, and I thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Laura. No, that was extremely helpful. Thanks very much. And I want to tell you all, what was amazing to me going around the state is that every leader I met, every parent leader, had been a part of the Texas Partners in Policymaking. And one day I connected all of those dots when Laura and I were talking, and it was just a remarkable thing. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, Texas Partner, I'll tell you this, Texas Parent to Parent, the executive director that started and ran that organization was a Partners graduate, and she just retired. The executive director of Family to Family that I mentioned, that's running the Texas Project First website, is a Partners in Policymaking graduate. So there's 2 examples right there.
Yeah, it is remarkable. So please consider it. And I consider each of you on this call today to be a leader. And if you are a parent, really please consider, or a self-advocate, participating in that. So I am the third and final speaker, and I will try to be fast so that we do have a time for Q&A. Just to tell you briefly about me, I am a genetic nurse with more than 30 years of experience. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Molecular and Human Genetics at Baylor and Texas Children's Hospital, and I'm the co-director for the Office of Community Engagement and Diversity. And in 2006, we began offering seminars at our Children's Museum in Houston for families to come and hear a different genetic or genomic topic. Back then, it wasn't genomic, it was just genetic. And we've always had family speakers as part of this. And now we've been, for the past 2 years, strictly webinars. But we did receive funding from the Department of State Health Services. And I guess 5 years ago, began collaborating with the UT Texas Center for Disability Studies. And that's when Laura Buckner and I began working together. So this has been a wonderful relationship. And Amanda may have joined the department about 5 years ago as well. So this is really wonderful. So just as you've heard and maybe already know, genetic disorders are individually rare, but collectively very common. And so I just love this website, the Positive Exposure website. And so just wanted to let you know about that one with the images of people with a variety of genetic. I think there's one person that needs to mute, and maybe I can help with that. Let's see. Okay, great. So I wanted to kind of start with early childhood services that are available. You all may already be well aware of early childhood intervention, and this is for babies birth to age 3. And they have to meet criteria for one of these indications: a medically diagnosed condition, hearing or visual impairment, developmental delay. And then there are services from a wide variety of therapists. So the ECI specialists themselves, speech and language pathologists, PT, OT, psychologists, nurses, dietitians, social workers, and counselors. And I will send you links to this as well. And let me see, my slide is not advancing. Okay, all right. And here's the website here for ECI. Also, the Children with Special Healthcare Needs program is one that does provide services, and families can sign up to learn more about this as well. And here is this additional website, and this is children up to the age of 20. This is an educational type of website that is sponsored by one of the regional genetic collaboratives, and it's called GEMS. And so it really includes information not only for families, but healthcare providers and then the schools, and can give some very specific examples of children with specific conditions for teachers as well, and to let the parents know and the teachers the kind of educational supports, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of the child with that particular condition and what we know about it, and what kind of behavioral and sensory support they might need. Mountain States Genetics, and Laura and I both serve on the Texas team for the Mountain States Genetics Regional Network. And I think Texas is included because of our tall mountains in El Paso. This is a really wonderful collaboration with networks across the country. The Mountain States region, we try to provide resources and information. We have genetic ambassadors, so families can contact that family and learn more about regional resources. And our current Texas ambassador is in El Paso, Lourdes Torres, and her name is on the website and her contact information. So there's a wealth of information there. The Evenings with Genetics, as I just mentioned, is our program in Houston at Baylor, but it is open to everyone because it is virtual right now. And so you don't have to be in person. And our upcoming topic on February 15th will be on race and genetics, on perspectives in precision medicine, with 2 fantastic speakers and a parent speaker. So you are welcome. These are all free and open to everyone. The Texas RareAction Network is actually an offshoot from the National Organization for Rare Disorders, and each state has an ambassador, and this is all volunteer-run network, and I would encourage you to get involved. Debbie Skolasky in Houston is the grandparent of a child with a rare genetic condition, and she is the current state ambassador. There was planned to be an event February 28th, which is always Rare Disease Day, but this was decided to become a virtual event, and you can find out how to participate in the 1-hour event on February 28th, which will be a lot of fun. There are going to be some celebrities on that, and it will be sponsored by the national office. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. If your children are becoming Teenagers, they're getting into that age group of even 12, 13, 14, to really talk about transitioning to adult care and how you can help your child prepare and yourself for moving into adult care. And it helps with some of the specific things in questionnaires. If your child is able to answer this, or you can answer it as well, it talks about some of the core elements. And does your child know the name of their diagnosis? Do they know the medications they're taking? Can they take their medications on their own? Do they know how to reach their doctor? Things like that. And really helping think about the things so that the transition is successful. And we really try very hard not to wait until the last minute. Nobody wants a handoff and say, well, at your next appointment, you're going to an adult physician. It needs to be really a years of handoff and patient so that it is successful. So this is a really valuable website. Disability Rights Texas is another one that I think is important to know. What services, what rights Texans with disabilities have. And I think they have been very helpful with families. How to find research studies. Sometimes families have said they'd like to participate, but they don't know how to get involved. And the clinicaltrials.gov is a really helpful website. You can even type in the name of the condition. You can see how many studies are available, which ones are active, which ones perhaps are in your area, or if you want to contact the researcher in another location, another site. So these are not only national studies, these are international studies as well. Baylor College of Medicine, where I am, has a lot of clinical trials going on, very active. And so this is one way to find out what studies are available. Particular study, since autism is such a common condition, is the Spark for Autism. And there is a Spark team at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, and this is information. And families can participate in this study if they qualify and are eligible. So it would be just a cheek swab, a saliva sample from the child and the parents at no charge to the family. 211 Texas is a really good general website, and this can be very helpful in finding all sorts of resources. And you just dial 211, that's it. And you can speak with someone, say what region of the state that you're in and what type of resources you need, and they will find it for you, or you can go to the website. So in summary, I would just like to say that genetic conditions impact a significant portion of the population. And at our first Rare Disease Day event that we held in Houston, family leaders from 35 support organizations participated and were so shocked to find out that they weren't the only ones. And so I think that you all, each of you as leaders, need to recognize that and know that you can play a huge role, not only in our state, but beyond. And something that impacts a lot of people across the country and across the world. And that children with genetic conditions may not have a treatment yet, but there's always a management plan. And so we do try to guide families towards having a genetic evaluation so that that plan can be developed that not only includes a medical plan, but also includes an educational plan and recognizing the child's strengths as along with their weaknesses so that you can help them in the best way possible. And so there are a lot of organizations. We have tried to cull it to what each of us feels might be the most essential to helping you. But we are happy to now take your questions and find out what organizations you may be aware of or where you need additional support. So really, I'm very grateful to our ability to work with Laura Buckner and the UT Texas Center for Disability Studies and this funding from the Texas Department of State Health Services and really the sponsorship and support of my department.